Hello, I've improved the lighting trying to get a better picture quality as we go into John chapter 4, part 3. God willing, today we will finish talking about Jesus and the Samaritan at the well and get to the point where Jesus is actually leaving Samaria. Now, we've already talked about the setting and the beginning of the conversation. I'm going to backtrack just a hair, start in verse 19. So, chapter 4, verse 19. We have the partial belief of the woman. The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain. Ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. So what had just happened is Jesus had told her to get her husband. This was pointing out a sin she had in her life. She denied it, but Jesus showed that he knew her sin. Only after a person has admitted their sin, their unworthiness to get into heaven themselves, then the gospel comes in. So in saying that he is a prophet, she is saying you're right. She is giving a partial belief. She's admitting that he knows her. Now, she also gave a problem. The Samaritans have been told since their inception, since Jeroboam took them out of Israel, that they weren't to go to Jerusalem to worship. They were to worship false idols in these two mountains, and this is one of the mountains. And she had a problem because she'd always been brought up believing something. Well, we have many people today that were in America that were raised being taught something about God that's not in the Bible, just the same as she believed. These problems do need to get addressed, because as we go on to verse 21 and see Jesus' response, Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. He said, You're right. The answer isn't where you are. We don't have to go to a physical place in order to worship God, in order to make God happy. Ye worship ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. The promise of God for salvation was only to the Jews. Now everyone else gets in on it, because Abraham was promised that all nations would be blessed from Jesus. So this means we get a part of it, but we're not the people of the promise. While the Samaritans went outside of that promise when they broke the law of Moses and stopped worshiping where Moses said to. Now, we're not under the law of Moses. We're not asked to do those same things. But the hour cometh, and now is. This is talking about Jesus came, how it is now. When true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father speaketh such to worship him. Okay, in spirit. We're talking about being saved. We can't worship God before we're saved, because our spirit is dead from birth. We're born in sin. We're born desiring to serve ourselves, to make ourselves happy. Only after we get saved can we desire to serve God and make God happy. And in truth, we can't lie about it. God knows whether we're lying or telling the truth. Verse 24, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Now, he's repeating this idea of spirit and truth. It's very important. God is a spirit. That's why we're not supposed to make any picture of him, because he has no physical form. He has no physical image. When man is made in the image of God, it is not a physical likeness. Now, Jesus took on a body, but Jesus has not always had a body. And there is no description in the entire Bible of what Jesus looked like. We just know there was nothing about him that when you see him, you'd think he was any different than everybody else. Okay. So Jesus responded, and now we're going to have a response from the woman, which I call full belief. Verse 25, the woman saith unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called the Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all things. This Messiah is the promise that was given to Israel, that was given to Abraham, that the Jews have, that Jesus was talking about. And she was satisfied with them saying, you don't have to become a Jew to get saved. You don't have to go to Jerusalem and worship there because you don't have to become a Jew. But he did say, God promised the Jews something, and God is going to deliver it to the Jews. And she was okay with that. It is okay with Jesus being a Jew and Jesus being where salvation comes from. She's talking about the Messiah. She's talking about the Christ. This is the same word in two different languages. Messiah is Hebrew, Christ is Greek. So now she believes the Messiah. She believes in Jesus. Now Jesus confirms it. In verse 26, Jesus saith unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. Now we are done with the conversation the two of them had. Now we talked about the settings, we talked about the conversation. I want to look at the results. And there are three different groups of people that have results. The first results we see, or at least the first ones I'm going to talk about, are the woman. I'm going to skip down to verse 28 for a minute. The woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come and see a man, which told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Okay. The woman's result of being saved is that she went and told others. This is one of the things we are commanded to do by God. Every single Christian is to tell people what God has done for them. She didn't know the whole Bible, and most of us don't know the whole Bible, and that's okay. But we know something about God, and we're to tell people whatever it is we know. Now, it's not okay for us to stay knowing almost nothing. We are to study, we are to learn more so we can tell more. And that's the whole purpose of this Bible study, is so that we can learn more, so that we have more to tell people. Now, when she told them, actually, before I go to the Samaritans, their response, let me backtrack. We've got Jesus' disciples, the 5 people that followed him from chapter 1. And let's talk about that. We start in verse 8. In verse 8, it says, the disciples were gone away into the city to buy meat. The disciples did not witness this conversation between Jesus and the woman. They were following him probably because they thought that the Pharisees were after Jesus and that he was going to Samaria because the Pharisees wouldn't follow him there to get away from them. Now in verse 27, we have the disciples coming back. And upon this came his disciples and marveled that he talked with the woman. Yet no man said, What seekest thou, or why talkest thou with her? They were shocked. They were surprised. They were perhaps even appalled because all 5 of these men are Jews and proud of it. And he is talking with a woman that is basically anathema. She's a blasphemer in their eyes. And he's talking with them. But they didn't interrupt him because they have respect for him. They just waited and watched. Now, you remember the next verse, she left. When we go down to verse 31, we have the disciples again. In the meanwhile, so while the woman is going away into the city to tell everyone, his disciples prayed him, saying, Master, eat. Well, they went into the city to get food. Why? Because Jesus said he was hungry. Now they come back and they said, Jesus, eat. But he, that's Jesus, said unto them, I have meat that ye know not of. He refused to eat. Therefore said the disciples one to another, Hath any man brought him aught to eat? They think that the Samaritans fed him, which is to them an even greater evil than just talking to her. Jesus saith unto her, My meat is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. He's saying he didn't eat physical food. His hunger was not physical, just like his thirst was not physical. Jesus goes on to say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh the harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to the harvest. And he that reapeth receiveth wages, and gathereth fruit unto eternal life, unto life eternal, that both he that soweth and he that reapeth may rejoice together. And herein is that saying true, one soweth and another reapeth. I sent you to reap that whereon ye bestowed no labor. Other men labored, and ye entered into that labor, into their labors. Okay, Jesus is done talking. A lot of this, because of the next verse, appears like he's talking to the Samaritans. But so far as we know, the beginning of it was addressing the disciples, and the disciples heard the whole thing. What's the point? Jesus is saying, I came here to win souls. Jesus came to reach out to the Samaritans. Now, the disciples did not like that. How do I know? Well, we look at verse 43. Now, Jesus is no longer in Samaria. Now, after 2 days, he departed. That word he is singular. It's not we departed. It's not they departed. It's not Jesus and the disciples departed. The disciples are no longer with Jesus. It is my belief that they left Jesus because he reached out to the Samaritans. Jesus is now alone. So let's talk about the Samaritans. In verse 30, then they went out of the city and came unto him. These Samaritans believed this outcast, this sinner, who'd been married 5 times and divorced 5 times and now was living with a person she was not married to. In that culture, living with a person you're not married to deserved death. What they did, rather than killing her, was they banished her. You're an outcast. We want nothing to do with you. And yet when she came up to them, happy, excited, someone told me everything I've ever done. I think he's the Christ. Come and see for yourself. They all went to see. This woman at least wasn't a liar because they trusted her enough to go and check it out to see if she was right. Now we know from verse 39 the response the Samaritans had to what Jesus said we talked about before. And many of the Samaritans of the city believed on him for the saying of the woman which testified, he told me all that ever I did. So when the Samaritans were come unto him, they besought him they would tarry with them, and he abode there 2 days. This is singular already. The disciples are gone. Probably at this point where they're asking Jesus is saying yes. They're like, well, we're not staying, and they leave. They were offended by Jesus. They tripped. They went out of following Jesus. And many more believed because of his words. They believed enough to check out Jesus, but their belief grew. It's not more people necessarily, though I believe that it is more people. But that more means a greater faith or more faith. You see, faith is not you do it or you don't. Faith is a measure. You can measure something with a ruler, and it can be 1 inch, 3 inches, 12 inches. Well, our faith, we need enough faith to be willing to listen to someone. Then we need enough faith to believe what they say is true. Then we need enough faith to call out to God and say, okay, I'm trusting in you. But that doesn't stop. Then we need enough faith to study the Bible and learn what it says. And that faith needs to grow to our doing what the Bible says. And eventually, God willing, that faith will grow to the point where we're willing to give up whatever it costs for us to get closer to God. Because in the end, we will die. If we're not willing to give up our life, how will that be but going to heaven kicking and screaming? Wanting to stay alive here on this world. Now we've talked about Jesus witnessing to the Samaritan. This gives us a full presentation of the gospel, rather than the partial one that he gave to Nicodemus. Nicodemus didn't need every detail explained, because he had been raised in the church and knew the Bible. But the Samaritan didn't know the Bible. She only knew the tradition she was raised in. And Jesus gave a more complete explanation to her. Please come back next time as we continue on. Thank you.